What would you do if your home tried to harm you and your family? Would you pretend that it wasn't real, or would you try to leave? One family had to answer these questions as their dream home became a living nightmare. So join us as we dive into the haunting mystery of the Amityville Horror here on Mystery Archives. 1975. George Lutz tapped an anxious finger on his steering wheel and eyeballed the windows of the house ahead of him. His wife Kathy smiled as they pulled into the driveway. They hoped to find a new home for them and their 3 children, stumbling upon the perfect house for the perfect price. The Lutzes purchased what they thought was their dream come true. During the move, the family had the house blessed by a Catholic priest named Father Ray. George waved Ray into the house while they carried furniture out of the moving truck. The priest said about his business and soon emerged from the house with a concerning look on his face. George attempted to pay him, but Father Ray declined, saying, "You won't be charged for this." Before the priest left, he said he felt something strange in one of the upstairs bedrooms. George told him that they weren't planning on using that bedroom for anything other than the sewing room, and Ray replied, "That's good, just as long as no one sleeps in there." Shortly after the Lutzes moved into their new home, they felt spots of intense cold in random areas of the house. A sense of unease filled the air, and loud noises jolted the family awake in the middle of the night. The strange activity only continued to escalate. One morning, the family woke to a startling sight. A black slime-like substance was oozing from the keyholes of their doors, and a trail of it was leading from room to room. As time went on, they began to hear phantom footsteps and banging throughout the house. During one episode, George heard what sounded like music blasting from the basement. Quickly rushing down the stairs, George was confronted by a deafening silence. Despite what he had heard just minutes prior, there was no sign of anything or anyone. As more time continued to pass, the family began to notice more unsettling manifestations within their home. The now sewing room that Father Ray had felt uncomfortable in had slowly but surely began to be infested with flies. At first they thought perhaps the house being older, this was just something that they weren't used to. But despite their best efforts to rid themselves of the insects, they could never quite quell the infestation. During their stay, the Lutz family found themselves changing in various ways. George began to seclude himself from his family and developed a strange obsession with the fireplace. Constantly complaining that he was cold, he chopped and placed as much wood as he possibly could within it. But no matter how much he piled on, the flames of the fire could never manage to warm him. Kathy too began to change and experience her own events. They began when she was often alone and vulnerable. She would feel the ice-cold touch of unseen hands, and at one point, the hands even braided her hair. These events were eventually witnessed by George as well. One night as the couple slept, Kathy woke up with a gasp. George then saw staring back at him as he awakened the face of an old woman instead of the face of his wife. The shock quickly turned to terror as the couple attempted to figure out just what had happened to Kathy. But just as quick as it came, the mirage dissipated hours later, revealing Kathy's youthful face once again. The Lutzes by this time knew that they had to be dealing with something paranormal. First, not wanting to involve anyone else with whatever was in the house, they tried blessing the home themselves. Kathy, who had always been religious, was the one who attempted the blessing. She moved from room to room, opening the windows and blessing each space. Things seemed to be going well when suddenly one of the windows slammed upon one of their children's hands. This was no ordinary injury, however. The boy's hands were bruised and as flat as a pancake. Panic set in as the family geared up to rush to the hospital, but as they approached the front door, their son's hands were completely normal. This was bizarre for George, Kathy, and the other children to witness, to say the least, but it was just as shocking to their son as well. It was as if the house didn't want them to leave. Tension within the home became so thick that you could cut it with a knife. Along with George and Kathy now barely talking, the children began to act more aggressively towards one another, as well as their parents, leading to escalating punishments. The youngest child, Missy, developed a relationship with an imaginary friend that she named Jody. Jody lived in her bedroom and would reveal herself to Missy in the form of a large pig. At one point, George and Kathy were talking to Missy in her bedroom, but whatever they were discussing soon went by the wayside when the couple saw two red eyes staring at them from the window. Scared at the sight, Missy attempted to calm them down. She told them that it was only Jody, letting them know that she wanted to come into the house. As more time went on, the family became more and more convinced that something had been wrong from the very beginning. When George and Kathy had first toured the house, the realtor had shuffled in discomfort. She said she wasn't sure if she should have told them before or after she showed them the house. The couple raised their eyebrows, asking her what she meant. She said that this is the house the DeFeo murders took place in. The couple remembered the year prior when the newspapers, smacked with headlines, described the gruesome murder of an entire family at the hands of their 23-year-old son, Ronald DeFeo Jr. Rifle in hand, Ronald crept into each room and shot his parents and all of his siblings in their beds while they slept. All victims were found face down, each one never having woken up during the slaughter of the other. During the trial, Ronald claimed that voices told him to kill his family, but that he had no recollection of the murders ever taking place. He was subsequently convicted and given multiple life sentences in prison. Concerned for their children, George and Kathy asked them if they would be comfortable living in a place where such tragedy had occurred. The children nodded and the deal was made. In order to put themselves more at ease, they called Father Ray to bless the house. Later on, Father Ray would reveal that during his blessing, he entered one of the rooms upstairs, where he heard a disembodied voice tell him to get out. George lay down next to his wife, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He pondered the fact that everyone else slept on their stomachs, except for him. They slept face down, just as the DeFeos had. As he laid there, he began listening to the massive storm that was raging outside, when suddenly there was a bright burst of lightning that lit up their entire bedroom. Temporarily blinded, he called out to Kathy and reached for her, but Kathy was not directly beside him. Once regaining his sight, George now saw that Kathy was levitating and floating towards the wall. He then began to hear loud bangs emanating from throughout the house, coupled by the screams of his children. Their beds were lifting up and slamming onto the floor by themselves. After awakening Kathy and bringing her back down to earth, so to speak, they quickly rushed out of their bedroom, where they witnessed their dog walking backwards in circles while vomiting. They then gathered the children and rushed to the family room, where they contemplated what they should do next and what they could do as they weathered this hellish storm. The following day, unsure of their plans, the Lutz fled that very afternoon, and they had only managed to live within the home for exactly 29 days. And despite the entire family witnessing the storm, there was no record of it ever existing. Trying to make sense of the horror that plagued their family, George and Kathy contacted world-renowned paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens entered the home and almost immediately experienced activity. Lorraine said that sadness and depression permeated the house. When entering the basement, Ed described a powerful and human presence. He said it felt like standing beneath a waterfall. He called upon the force to reveal its identity, and suddenly realized that this was no ordinary haunted house. After the initial investigation, the Warrens compiled a team of psychics to assist them. Among them was a psychic named Mary Passarella, and Mary considered herself to be a time walker, a person capable of visualizing and experiencing the past in a location. During the investigation, Mary began reciting the Lord's Prayer and witnessed a group of figures saying the prayer backwards. After completing the investigation, Lorraine stated, "Whatever is here in my estimation most definitely is of a negative nature. It has nothing to do with anyone who had once walked the earth in human form. It comes right from the bowels of the earth." The Warrens told the Lutzes that they felt that their house could only be saved through a cleansing performed by an ordained priest. However, the Lutzes were uncomfortable with this, saying that they felt like they'd be risking their lives, and how could they be asked to do that for a house? They decided to cut their losses and returned the property rather than put their children in any further danger. Years later, a book and movie adaptation would popularize their story, along with allegations of it all being a hoax. However, George and Kathy Lutz lost not only their life savings, but the majority of their credibility due to the story. They continued to maintain that their story was genuine for the rest of their lives. George later stated in a 2002 interview, "It's my prayer that everyone in this room never go through such a thing, but if you know someone that does, the hardest thing for people is the loss of being able to communicate with anyone else about it, not being able to find anyone that can intelligently help. It's not talked about, it's not understood, and when it happens to you, you become an alien to everyone else." So was the story true or false? Make sure to let me know down in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for new content. And as always, this has been Cody here with Mystery Archives. And make sure to join us next time as we continue to discover the unexplained.